Good afternoon, class. This is Dr. Jules, and I greet you today on this wonderful Monday afternoon. It's the second week of January 2020, and we've made it this far by the grace of God. God has allowed you to prosper and grow, and I encourage you to continue to seek Him in everything that you do in the year ahead, the weeks ahead. 50 plus weeks before us in 2020. But let's just keep each other up in prayer and seeking God in all that we do. Well, this is pastoral counseling, and we're starting our second week for the course. And one of the things that I try to do is to post up a video to always help the students in really understanding what they're reading and what they're doing in the class. So today I just want to begin by going over the introduction, chapter 1. By now, you should probably get your textbook, so you're in the process of getting it. If you notice in the lesson tab, I have PowerPoints for week 1 and week 2, and there's also going to be some videos and assignments that you want to follow along. I know one of your assignments for the class is to honor a biography, and basically, as I said in the last video, at week 4 or beginning of week 4, you're going to pick 5 journals or books in the last 5 years that talks about pastoral counseling. So it might be a combination of 3 books and 3 journals, or however you want to do it. Basically, best thing is to not to have to spend money. You get the journals and you just read the summary, and basically you're going to write 2-paragraph summary of that. And you're just going to put the citation on the top for each journal, number 1, citation, the author, date, everything, and then 2 paragraphs about that. And that's it. You don't have to read the whole thing, but you're just summarizing what the content of the information is about. Okay. So on week 4, you're going to turn that in. It's about 5 of them. And then at week 8, you're going to do another one. Okay. So that way it gives you resources. At the end of your syllabi, I do have some books, but those are very outdated. So you want to really look at Amazon. You go to the school library, or you go to Google Scholar or Scholar Google, however you want to type it in. And then you could type in the last 5 years and type pastoral counseling. And you might want to pick different topics that you want to look into: marriage, premarital, divorce, suicide, those type of things that you want to look into as you talk about pastoral counseling. Well, I'm teaching this course not only as a pastor, I am a pastor, but as an educator. I basically, from my experience over 17 plus years as a pastor at my church, working with children and youth and adults, I was privileged to be able to counsel couples, which is so unique. I was counseling couples even before I got married back in 2005. And I remember a wife calling me about her marital issues and invited me to her house to speak to her. And I remember I was saying, ma'am, I'm not married yet. I don't have the experience yet. She was like, that's not the point. You're a pastor. And she knows I had the training. So I was able to help them out and they stayed married. So again, what we're going to be looking into is this textbook, and it's called Skills for Effective Counseling. Skills for Effective Counseling. It's basically a faith-based integration. Okay, there's many types of books, as you guys say in your discussions last week. There's secular counseling, there's Christian counseling, there's pastoral counseling, there's biblical counseling. There's so many different types. Okay, and as someone said in discussion as I was reading it, true, somebody could read a Christian counseling book and not be a Christian. Basically Christian counseling dealing with the Christ in the Christian context, where a man or woman of God who is a believer not only learn the secular techniques and strategies, but they also know the biblical components of Christian counseling, how to counsel somebody from a biblical perspective. So I want to go over an introduction for a minute, because there's some very important information here in this book. Basically, in the introduction, it talks about some key things, okay? And what we're going to be looking into is 3 different people. We have the counselor, we have the counselee, okay? We have the counselor and we have a counselee. The counselor is the person who's counseling, okay? It doesn't necessarily have to be a pastor, okay? God can use lay people in the church to counsel other members, okay? But, sometimes there's some things that a pastor might be able to do that another may not, okay? But the counselee has to do with the person receiving the counseling. Okay, the counselor is the one, imparting or listening, and the counselee is the one who's receiving the counseling. As it says here, counselor refers to anyone in the helper role. Okay, that's what it says on the first page of his textbook. The counselor is anyone in the helper role. Okay, the counselee refers to the individual who needs help. Okay, so anybody who comes in the situation where they need help is a counselee, and anyone in the position of listening and helping somebody is a counselor. Okay, so there's so many different so many different types of counselors out there, but that's basically it. The author talks about the book, and basically the book has specific things that it wants to do. There's different components of the book, and I encourage you to read it. There's the empirical support, which is research. And basically, you're going to get some important information from the author about different research that's been done on the topics that are being discussed. Okay, so it's very important. I might not always highlight all that. I might go into the practical and we might go into technical strategy, but it's always important to highlight those things because it's going to be very important for you tomorrow as you're in a counselor role helping somebody. Then we see the biblical theological considerations, and basically that has to do with the biblical component of counseling. The author might give you a verse, and might give you ideas, and might give some theology that covers the topic and stuff, but it's very important to highlight those things. This textbook is so good because we're not going to cover everything in 8 weeks. There's no way we could go over every topic, but this is just a beginning in your graduate work, and especially if you're Christian counseling, major concentrations in Christian counseling. You're going to be taking more classes on this to help you out with other professors, not just me, Dr. Patrick. Then we see diagnostic implications. Basically, how do you find ways to help those individuals who are going through those situations? What tools do you use? And that's what the author gives. We see the multicultural application. And one of the things that I see the authors have done is that they've given the information in such a way that it applies to different cultures. If you're in a church that has different types of cultures and people sitting there, you're going to find that what works for one group may not work for another group because everybody has a different worldview, a biblical worldview, family background. They have different perceptions and ways of doing things. When you see a mixture of a husband and wife where one person's from another culture and then the other person's from this culture, sometimes those type of things require more time. It's very delicate, in those situations because everybody has a culture that's different or were raised differently, So that's why he talks about multicultural application, okay? Then we see a relationship application when it comes to relationships. And we all have different types of relationships. We have relationships with our parents. We have relationships with our church. We have relationships with our intermediate family. We have relationships with our brothers or sisters, our cousins, our aunts, our uncles, great, family members. We have long lost cousins. Everybody's in a different relationship. And then we have relationships with our friends, okay? Our colleagues at work, students and peers from school, okay? So there's always different relationships that we need to know about. And the very last thing the author talks about is the ministry application, okay? When it comes to ministry, this book really goes into really teaching you about ministry, because counseling is a ministry, when a professional counselor is working in the secular world, that's professionals, when a Christian counselor is working and have his office, that's the professional. But at the same time, being a professional working for payment is one thing, but not every Christian counseling is done outside. Some of it is done in a church setting. And some of the church settings are ministry based. And most of you might be doing something as a ministry, counseling those who hunger and thirst for that. Okay. So that's what we're going to be looking into. When you turn over to chapter 6, page 6 of the text, it talks about the different counselor organizations. Okay. Now, I've always emphasized, those of you in the master's program, that, if you are deciding on Christian counseling, one of the good things about it is that you can become a professional chaplain. And a professional chaplain, as I've stated over and over again, is a professional who works. There's a community minister who can work at a detention, a prison, a nursing home, a hospital, And those are people who are really the ones who are going into seeing the patients and praying with them, talking with them, counseling with them. But the key thing about it is that the minimum requirements to have a Master of Divinity to become a chaplain. Again, if you're going to go get a Master of Arts in counseling, okay, you can get licensed to open up your own office, but you may or may not be able to serve as a chaplain, okay, in those places that are specified, okay? So that's why the Master of Divinity, which is 90 credits, okay? And then there's the component where you take the Christian counseling course. So I've stated to many of you before, when you're doing the Master of Divinity with Christian counseling, after you graduate, there is an accreditation, there's additional course that you have to take, a chaplain program that you could take at either University of Miami, there's some other places online. And if you look on page 6, there's these organizations that you see here. The Association of Christian Counseling, the Association of Pastoral Counselors, Association of Clinical Pastoral Education. And that is exactly where you get that additional course. It's 4 CEUs to become a professional chaplain after you complete the Master of Divinity, okay? So please remember as I say that. And all these other things that you can see here. Those who desire to open up their own practice, there are some additional courses you do have to take, okay? But that requires you to really get into that. Those organizations might be able to tell you more about that, because getting a license in each state is different. In the state of Florida, there might be additional requirements, okay? So that's basically what we're talking about in the introduction, okay? Now, when we move on to chapter 1, we see the micro skills approach. And I'm just going to pop up my screen here. And I'm going to go into the class. And you're going to see as I go into lesson 1. Okay, lesson 1, week 1. Okay, and I have PowerPoints here for week 1, which is chapter 1. All right. And in chapter 1, it talks about skills for effective counseling. And we're going to look at chapter 1, the micro skills approach. Okay. And this chapter right here talks about the skills of a counselor. Okay. When you look at this, first of all, chapter 1, the first slide says skills. What is skills? A counselor needs to have certain skills to be able to be effective, because anybody can listen, but not anybody can be able to listen and be able to help the person in front of them, okay? So the skill of learning new skills and identifying phases of counseling process and the related target areas. So in this class, in this book, in this textbook, skills has to do with you as a student identifying the counseling process, okay? There's a process to counseling. There's a way that we counsel people. There's a way we make people feel when we're counseling them. Just like in preaching, there's a difference between when I preach and when I teach. Two different things. Somebody can holler and make you say hallelujah as many times, but when it comes to teaching is taking more time, going in depth with the Word of God. Same thing with counseling. Counseling is listening, but also in the listening, there's stage 1, stage 2, stage 3. In order to be the type of counselor that can help the person who's in need, okay? So there's targeted skills, specific skills that you have to be aware of, okay? Now the purpose of chapter 1 is to discuss the goals of counseling, the roles of a counselor and counselee, the language of micro skills, and the process of acquiring new skills. So in chapter 1, as you read it, you might think it's a lot, but it's really self-explanatory. And it's going to discuss what are the goals of counseling, okay? As a counselor, is it all about just listening to people? What am I trying to accomplish when I listen to somebody? Then it's going to talk about the roles of a counselor and a counselee, okay? As it says here, the process of acquiring new skills and target skills of various phases of the counseling process. There's a formula here. The author always gives you some type of thing here. It says formulas. I learned this new skill best by. Now, in order for us to understand the skills and the processes, you as the student, as a future counselor, as a minister, you got to know how you learn best, okay? Some people learn by reading. Some people learn by watching and visualizing it, seeing it. Some people learn by doing, okay? So as you're acquiring these skills in the text, okay, I encourage you to get a journal, get a notebook, and as you're reading, jot down the important skills that you see from the book, because you might become practical for you in the future, where at some point you might be ministering and counseling to somebody, and you don't have the textbook in your hand, but you might be able to pull out that notebook and counsel somebody who's in need. Okay. It says the phases of counseling process are characterized by the following target areas. So basically, there's different words that you're going to be seeing in chapter 1, and basically, you have to be able to identify them. Let's move on. Chapter 1. The goals of counseling are 2. Okay. What are the goals of counseling? Number 1, to collaboratively set short-term and long-term goals. So one of the goals of a counselor is to help the individual set short-term and long-term goals. Because when the person is coming to you and they're telling you their problems and they're telling you their frustrations, there should be a response from the counselor to help the person see the light, to help them see something that they can overcome, find a way to help them find solutions. Okay, that's your job as a minister, as a counselor, whatever capacity that you might be working in. Facilitate the next step of growth. So if somebody's coming to you and they're asking you and telling you about their personal problems, you ask them, okay, so what's next? What are you going to do next? How are you going to get to this? How are you going to get out of this? Who do you need to see? What steps you need to take? Okay, that's the job of a counselor. The goals of counseling is focus on the counselee needs. This is very important, ladies and gentlemen. As you're counseling somebody, you need to have good ears to listen. It's funny as I say that. I always like to joke around about my hearing impairment, but I know that as the person that I am with my impairment, I always take more time to listen to what people are saying. Okay, because sometimes someone comes to you and they're sitting in your office or they're wherever you're meeting with them at, and in the back of your mind you have to say, what is this person trying to say? What exactly is that person's problem that they're sharing with you in that moment? You always have to take a few more minutes to really listen to what the person's saying. Instead of just jumping and just giving solutions, it's important to see the needs, because there's a difference between needs and wants. The person might tell you a problem, they might be sharing something that they want to do, but it's not always what they need to do. Okay, and it's always interesting how when people have, when I'm counseling married couples and listening to the husband, listening to the wife, and seeing their frustrations with one another, it's all about needs and wants. Sometimes one person wants this and the other person does not understand that. Okay, and it's basically, I found that sometimes I have to explain to them, well, this person is saying this because there's a certain need that's not being met, or there's an expectation that has not been basically specified, so that he or she can understand their roles as husband and wife. Okay. Focus on the counselor's strengths. Now, this is the thing that I love to do in counseling and ministering, and you've probably been in my office a couple of times. When someone's in front of you and they're talking to you about their problems, okay, not only are you going to listen to their needs, but you also want to listen to what they're good at. Because one of the things about counseling is you have to motivate the person. The person needs some motivation and encouragement, because the person already in the back of their mind feels like, well, I can't do this. This is too hard for me. I can't make it. I can't overcome this. Your job as the counselor is to help the person see what they've already accomplished, what they've done already. Say, John, you've done a good job with this right now. Mary, you've done a good job passing your first course. Keep going. Keep working. You got 52 credits. You need 60 to graduate. Come on, you're almost there. Keep moving. So you give them something positive. Or if it's counseling a couple, you have a great husband. You always help. Your wife has done a good job providing and helping and, blessing you with wonderful children. And those are the type of things that people need to hear. Because all of us, even pastors, at times we need encouragement. We need to feel like we're doing something positive, because when you're in ministry, The enemy is always going to try to discourage you in the work that you're doing. Okay. So that's why it's so important. Moving along, the goals of counseling are not. Now, there are things that you don't do as a counselor. And please highlight this in the textbook. You don't give advice. You do not give advice on what the person wants to hear. Okay. Sometimes when I find even in my own marital situation where, sometimes the wife will be sharing something to me and I feel like I should just give her advice on what she wants to hear. But sometimes it's about just listening to what the person is saying first. That's why needs and wants are so important in counseling. Okay. So as a counselor, I'm focusing on the counselor's needs and the strengths. But I don't jump into giving advice about everything that they're sharing with me, because sometimes it takes time to help the counselee process what they're saying. Okay, they might be saying something that it's not relevant with the problem, because one of the goals as a counselor, you're helping the person to identify what are the key problems that they're talking about. Okay, so you don't try to give advice. Number two, you don't fix things. You're not a fixer. You're not Olivia Hope. Okay, if you guys watch that show, you don't fix things. You don't try to fix it for them. Matter of fact, as a counselor, from my understanding, you help them find solutions. If you're telling the person what to do and they're not thinking and processing themselves, you're not helping them. You want them to be able to process it on their own by asking key questions so that he or she can find solutions on their own. If the person knows that they need to communicate with their spouse and you're telling them to communicate, they don't see it for themselves, they're going to say, oh, the counselor told me that. But they won't see the reason why they need to do it. Number three, you don't convince the person. It goes back to what I just said a minute ago. You don't try to convince the person to change. The person has to see the need to change on their own. Okay, and that's the role of a counselor. You're helping the person. Number four, help counselees feel better or happier. We're not in the business of helping make people feel happy. That's why the Bible says, it's not about happiness, it's about joy, and the Lord gives us joy. Because not everything is going to happen. Matter of fact, happiness is based on, things and people and emotions. And sometimes you're working and you're doing things, you're not always going to feel happy. Okay. But we want people to find solutions to what their problems are. Okay. I hope I'm really explaining this in such a way that you understand. Moving on to chapter one, pardon me. I'm moving the screen around. The role of a counselor versus the role of a counselee. The types of counselees and counselors. Okay, so in chapter one, it talks about the roles of the counselor versus counselee. The first one is the visitor versus the host. When you invite somebody to your home, there's a visitor come and the host comes in, and the visitor comes in and is polite and picks up a conversation with the host and say, oh, this is nice. So that's one role of counseling. Counselors and counselees. So the one is the host and one is the visitor. The other one is the complaint. And I want you to read chapter 1 where it says visitor and host to really understand better. The next one says the complaint and the sympathizer. Okay. So in another role of counselee is the person's going to come and sometimes tell you all these problems, what people have done with them, and they want you to sympathize with them. They want to play the victim. They want you to be able to say that the other person is wrong. Okay, that's not the role of counseling. Okay, but that sometimes they want someone to sympathize with them. And I'm sure you've been in situations where there are people who play the victim no matter what. They can be wrong, and you're trying to get them to see that they're wrong, but they still play the victim. Okay, that's the role that we have to be very cautious about. Number three, the customer and the consultant. In this role, you have somebody coming to you, whether professional in your office or a ministry setting. That person's a customer. And in a professional setting, you want to keep the customer coming as much as you can. That's how you make a profit, right? And then you as a consultant, you're consulting with the person, okay? And you're sharing them ideas and advice on how to better themselves. in this role, it kind of becomes like the person at some point becomes dependent on the counselor. Every time something arises, they come back to the counselor for help and assistance. And this is very relevant in the counseling field, where some people have to see a counselor every week, you know. So those are the roles of counseling. Okay. Uh, in chapter 1, it talks about your skills. What are the skills involved in counseling? Okay. As you dig in chapter 1, you're reading it, you're going to see exactly what I'm talking about. The new skills, the first skill is the 3 domains of learning. Okay. It talks about what are the domains of how we learn. Okay. There's a cognitive, which has to deal with how you process, how you receive things in your mind and stuff. There's the affective and there's a psychomotor. All that has to do with mental, the mental aspects of learning. Okay. Keep reading, you'll see. The other skill is motivation. Motivation has to do with what causes us, what pushes us to do certain things. As this morning, I got up, I dropped the kids at school, and then I told myself, I'm going to the gym. So something pushed me, motivated me to want to do it. Okay. As I'm thinking about the new year, I'm thinking about my health and ministry and stuff. That has to do with motivation. There has to be a purpose beside in everything that we do. When the counselee comes to a counselor, there's a motivation factor into it. A reason why that person is motivated to seek help. Because without motivation, that person is not going to seek help from anybody. Okay. Then you see another skill is receiving feedback. Okay. There are those who it's a practice for somebody to receive feedback. Then resisting discouragement and persistence. Those are the skills that you're getting in chapter 1. Okay. So as you look at the following slide, you see the rational for skills, clear instructions, observe, practice, evaluate. That's the process that the chapter is going about. And I'm not going to go directly into that, but I really want you to read this yourself, okay? And really, highlight this. As I said, take a journal, write these things down, because you're going to use them in the future, okay? All right. There's different stages of counseling, and that's why the author talks about the early, the middle, and the late, okay? And there's different times of counseling. There's different times to share, you could say, for example, the first meeting with a counselee is not the day that you share all your ideas. You give them all the strengths and all the motivation. That's the establishing relationship. Basically, the very first meeting with the person, you have to establish a relationship with the person. That person has to feel comfortable with you, and you feel comfortable with that person. It's very important to learn the roles of how to establish a good working relationship with somebody, especially a trustworthy type of relationship where that person feels like he or she can trust you as a counselor and as a minister. The next thing you see, number 2, is deepening. After you establish the relationship, then you begin to go deeper. That's why in counseling, the first time the person meets you, they're not going to share everything with you. But it's a stage, it's a process. They're going to take their time to test you out to see how things work out. So as you move from session 1 to session 2 to session 3 with the person, you begin to go deeper. They go deeper, and you begin to see the growth. Then the consolidating and ending. One of the things about counseling, whether you're in ministry or you're in the professional world, there's a time to begin and there has to be a time to end. Okay, it's not forever. Okay, or else that person becomes dependent on you in your counseling role. Okay, so there has to be a time to end, and that's important. And that's the author's going to talk about that in the future. Counseling agreements and things like that. That really helps us. Okay, so what I've shared with you is PowerPoint number 1, which deals with chapter 1. Hopefully you get the textbook and you have it. For week 2, you're reading chapter 1 and the introduction, chapter 1 and chapter 2. Okay, and if I'm correct, you're going to have a quiz by Sunday night. That's going to cover chapters, the introduction, chapter 1, chapter 2, I believe. Okay. Excuse me. Yeah. So introduction, chapter 1 was last week. And this week you have week 2 of my syllabus is to read chapters 2 and 5. If you get the book, so your job is to read intro to chapter 5. Okay, and if you don't have the book, watch the lessons. I'm going to post chapters 2 to 5 in week 2. That way you can review everything. And later on this week, I'm going to post a second video on chapters 2 to 5, and there's going to be a discussion posted. As for discussion, you're going to have a quiz. I'm posting a quiz by Friday, so you could take it over a weekend. And then I want you to start working. But I remember here you have a research paper. Your research paper is due during the week 8. Now, it's important that you understand that the research paper, is due during week 8, and you have to pick a topic. So one of the things I want you to do by the end of this week, by Sunday night, if you're looking back at the syllabus, I have some topics here on there, and I want you to pick one of the topics. You could pick a topic on what I have in the paper. You could pick a topic with a professor approval on counseling. You might want to go into counseling teenagers, counseling married, counseling women, counseling men, counseling suicide, those who are suicidal thoughts, counseling the grieving, counseling, pastoral counseling. For example, good topics have counseling a pastor, okay? Even the pastor who's a counselor needs to be counseled and mentored, okay? So whatever interests you, that's what I want you to write your paper on. And as I've said here, the paper, it's important to use at least 8 to 10 resources, okay, for your paper. It is a graduate level research paper using APA formatting. It's due on week 8, which is February 28th. So it's not something you try to do in 1 week. It's something that you start working on it now. I've tried to keep the class as minimum as possible because 8 weeks and a lot to cover. So class, chapters 1 through 5 is your assignment for the week. The lessons are going to be in week 2 for chapters 2 to 5, and week 1 has the intro in chapter 1. Okay. If you have any questions, please feel free to email me at pjules@uftl.edu. And I look forward to seeing you later on in chapel. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask or email me. I wish you the best and have a wonderful week, and put God first, and always focus on graduation. No matter how hard it feels and gets, classes, workload, but if you just remember the perspective that God has placed you here for a reason, and if He put you here, then He's going to help you to finish, not by your strength, but by His strength. Have a wonderful week, and God bless you.